and welcome to episode 7 of Papa Tom's Take. It's June 18th, and the title of this episode is Forest for the Trees, and it is a takeoff of the old saying, don't miss the forest for looking at the trees. I could talk about individual events. I could talk about the obvious failure of Doge, the fact that the Ukrainian-Russian war is continuing, and all the other specifics related to what's going on with P-47's administration. But today, rather than attacking a different mole in the whack-a-mole environment we seem to be living in, I want to pick up on something that was actually started in my brain from Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. On the Senate floor not too long ago, he gave an interesting and detailed description of the steps that happen when a democracy slides into being an autocracy. And he made the point, and I think it's interesting to make, that if you look through history or even current regimes, it's not one single event that turns a country from a democracy into an autocracy, but it's rather a slide. And he outlined four steps, if you will, or four areas of society, of civilization, that need to come under attack in order for this slide to take place. And if I were you, I'd check this out. It's on YouTube. Senator Murphy's a very thoughtful and interesting senator. He points out that one of the first areas that a regime will attack as they try to move a country from a democracy is journalism. Journalists, as you can observe, are under attack currently. Not only has this White House changed the protocol for having reporters, journalists in the presence in the White House, they've affected the credentials, they've changed the order. Priority is given to news sources that are favorable to the administration. And journalists also are caught kind of in a buzzsaw when the facts change so quickly. Journalists there's question about their truthfulness or their reliability. When the tariffs are on one day and the journalists report that the tariffs are increased to a different level, the journalists report that the tariffs are suspended, the journalists report that the tariffs are on at a slower level, the journalists report that. This buzzsaw makes it look like the journalists are unable to report the truth, when in fact they report the truth at that moment, but because of the boomeranging seesaw nature of decision making in this White House, it appears as though they're not doing that. So that brings the credibility of journalists into focus. Universities are the next area that a regime will attack. Again, there's abundance examples in the news. Some universities, like Columbia, have simply knuckled over. There's a state initiative here in Ohio that Ohio University has simply folded their tent and not put up any resistance at all, which for local people is a bone of contention. Harvard has the ability, partly because of their financing, to stand up. And even though this regime has tried several different things, freezing their grant money, not allowing them to have international students or international faculty, Harvard has the resources and also the will to fight that in the courts. And as of this moment, the Harvard has won a significant number of those lawsuits. Obviously, they'll be appealed and it'll go on for a while. But Harvard is the gold star of who's fighting back against this. But that's the second institution that Murphy pointed to that a regime will attack, and it makes sense because if a regime can control the university, they control the narrative, they remove academic freedom, so that students coming through will hear their version of whatever it is, their version of economics, their version of history, and so on. The third area that Murphy pointed to was lawyers. We've read in the news the fact that a large law firm that I had never heard of before, Paul Weiss, essentially knuckled under and said that they will provide information regarding their clients, and also they will provide pro bono work for causes that are favorable to P47's agenda. In the private sector, the last area is the private sector, and we've seen that with the tariffs, probably the best example is the tariffs. Again, they're on, they're off. The private sector has no real ability to do any planning for the future. Obviously, if you're a business that relies on either product or parts from nations like China, the product that you want is put on a ship at some point in 3 weeks or sometime later it reaches the port, and you have to pay the tariff whatever it is that day. So it's hard to plan ahead. And then beyond that is the pressure that this administration has put on the private sector, for example, Walmart, to not pass these tariff costs on to the consumer. I could go on a tangent about tariffs. P47 during the campaign gave the false impression that the exporting country paid the tariffs. Everyone knew that wasn't true. It's the consumer or the business that ultimately pays the tariffs. So this administration is now, while it's not acknowledging that there are additional costs, it's essentially acknowledging it because it's now putting pressure on retailers and businesses to not pass the cost of the tariffs on to the consumer. Obviously, making it look like to the uninformed consumer that P47 was right, that they're not going to pay the tariffs, when in fact they were. So the point that Murphy's making here is that by putting pressure on these 4 institutions, the regime gains more and more and more control of the narrative, and therefore gradually makes it more and more difficult for the opposition to win elections, to the point where the elections are either not held, or if they're held, they're simply a coronation of the additional administration. So watching that video from Murphy made me want to take a deeper dive into this. This slide from a democracy into a autocratic system, and that autocratic system could be an oligarchy, and that's a discussion for a different day. And so my research came up with a slightly different approach, but there's a lot of overlap. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as to what's happening currently under these different headings. If you're interested in this podcast, you're probably already interested in current affairs, and so you can probably plug in specifics. I will from time to time throw in a specific so that it's clear that I'm just not blowing smoke here. My research came up with, I think, 8 different categories, and they're not institutions, they're more like constructs. Undermining the democratic norms. There are so many examples of this that it would be trivial for me to begin to name them. My research showed that that could happen, for example, in disrespecting institutional checks and balances. The Congress under the Republican Party has basically abdicated their role as being a legitimate check and balance. And when an individual member of Congress tries to exercise their oversight rights and privileges, they're met with, in some cases, physical force. They're deprived the possibility of getting into a federal building. They are not allowed to easily carry out their oversight responsibilities. Uh, uh, P47 has called for the impeachment of federal judges who make rulings that are against his agenda. Happily, or happily, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts had written a retort basically to that says, oversimplified, that you don't like a judgment, you don't impeach a judge. You appeal their decision, but you don't impeach them over that. Under democratic norms, vilifying political opponents and minority groups, we've seen that so many cases of that. Whether it's uh, continuing to blame former President Biden for everything that's no longer under his control, to vilifying transgender people and using scare techniques to talk about the evil of drag queens. The second category I found was the erosion of civil liberties. This overlaps with Senator Murphy's in that it includes the press. The press has come under additional pressure. All the things I mentioned above. This also relates to academic freedom. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, and academic freedom grows out of that. And yet, the P47 administration is doing everything they can to impact academic freedom in terms of manipulating grant money and also eliminating or limiting the number of international students. Um, the spread of disinformation on social media and on some media sources is prevalent. I don't have to give you real examples of that because it's so obvious. And in fact, P47 himself is often a purveyor of disinformation as he talks in different venues. Some of that is, I think, simply his lack of real knowledge and understanding, and some of it, I think, is purposeful, and it's hard to separate out, but it doesn't matter. Once the words are out there, they're out there. The third category is the centralization of power. I've already mentioned the Republican Congress has essentially abdicated their role. There are lots of examples of that. Part of it was during the process of advise and consent of appointments. In nobody's universe is Pete Hegseth the best person to head the Defense Department. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in my opinion, my take, is a dangerous person. Rather than making America healthy again, I think he's in a position to make America much less healthy. But Congress didn't have a problem with supporting both of those and other nominees that were flawed. Clearly, P47 during the campaign said over and over again that he would surround himself with only the best people. If you look at the administration that he's assembled, it's hard to really suggest that if you go down the line one-on-one, that they are the best people available for the job. Under centralization of power, this regime has, under several different situations, declared emergencies and emergency powers that go along with those to the executive, when in fact it's very difficult to actually identify the emergency. One specific case was calling the migration over the southern border an invasion, and specifically invasion from Venezuela. There's no credible evidence that it's anything that would resemble an invasion, yet he used that to invoke emergency powers. I suspect that this will be an ongoing theme with this administration. The fourth category is the capture of institutions. We've already talked about the judiciary, and if we also factor in the Department of Justice, the Department of Justice is basically now a hand of the of P47. It's not an independent judgment area. And probably the most glaring example of this category is that early on, P47 fired 17 or 18, I've seen different reports, inspector generals. The inspector general, as you probably know, is that office is assigned to specific departments and programs, and their sole job is to keep an eye on the operation to eliminate the probability, if you will, of corruption and abuse and misuse of funds. By eliminating that office, that makes it easier for the appointees to those programs to basically do the will of P47, as opposed to following the law as it was written and given by the Congress. So that monies, for example, that Congress has appropriated for Program X can now be siphoned off and used for Program Y, or the goals of Program Z could be slightly modified to more fit the goals of this administration. And the Inspector General's office is now filled by loyalists appointed by the P47, so that they're just basically going to rubber stamp anything that administration wants. Moving on to category number 5, manipulation of elections. We see this in terms of gerrymandering in different areas. Different states have purged people from election rolls. There's a movement afoot to make everyone have evidence that relates back to their given name, so that women would have to have copies of their birth certificates in order to vote in an election. There are different activities of which I must admit I can't really recite lots of specifics, but nationwide and in individual states there are an effort to manipulate the electorate in such a way that would favor re-election of people in this autocratic movement area. Use of nationalism is the next category, and we see over and over that this administration is using us versus them, be it immigrants or transgender people, people of color. It's a white nationalist movement at heart, and we see that by not only actions but also words during the campaign. If you remember, P-47 used the term uh, uh, infecting the blood of the country. I'm not sure that's the right term that he used, but basically diluting the pure white European Anglo-Saxon uh, 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 blood of this country by immigrants from other parts of the world. That mirrors kind of the talk that Hitler engaged in the 1930s. So it's a nationalistic movement away from globalism, and I will freely comment here for anybody to listen that I believe that in this world, the 21st century, has to be a globalist point of view. That nationalism, in the end, won't work. The next category is tolerance of political violence. This P-47, dating back to the early debates, basically had a relationship with Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. He said in the debate for the Proud Boys to stand down and stand by. They led the charge of the insurrection on January 6th. And so there were, and most recently, we see, for example, the assassination of the politicians in Minnesota. Well, it's not overtly being tolerated by this organization. You do have some members of Congress who have tweeted some pretty damaging comments. And probably the best example is the fact that even though people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th were given due process and convicted, and in some cases serving time, this president has pardoned or given clemency to, I think the number is 1,500, maybe that's a wrong number, but a significant number of people who participated in that insurrection. Not only does that indicate a tolerance for violence, but it's kind of a red light to go do the violence. The last area that I found was legal and constitutional. We've already talked about the relationship of the P-47 with the judiciary, but this administration actually is going after the Constitution itself. It's raised questions about birthright citizenship that is clearly stated in the Constitution. It's using emergency powers to essentially suspend or limit habeas corpus, which is again in the Constitution. The raids of ICE and the incarceration or the of immigrant people seem to be going without regard in some cases. I won't say all. In some cases, without regard for due process. I've done a little bit of research on rights of undocumented people in terms of ICE and deportation, and I'm going to do a podcast on that in the very near future, so I'm not going to say a lot about that today. I will say that it's strange to me that in the United States, ICE agents and perhaps other law enforcement, and I wasn't aware of this, but I've seen videos of ICE agents most recently, are able to interact and take people into custody wearing masks and wearing not anything that is obviously denotes a badge or any kind of credentials. And anyway, like I said, I'll be doing a podcast on that very soon because I've done some research on that and have some positions. So this podcast is going on for probably longer than it needed to. But as always, I like to end my podcast with quotations. And this quotation comes from an unlikely source given the topic of the podcast. It comes from Mike Tomlin, who is the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you didn't already know that. Tomlin says, "It is not what you are capable of, it is what you are willing to do." So, in this time when we have people demonstrating in the streets and people writing letters and people donating money and people volunteering in any way they can, this is a very important quotation. I'm going to read it again. Tomlin says, "It is not what you're capable of, it is what you are willing to do." Thank you for taking the time to view this podcast, and I look forward to any comments that you would have. Don't forget, it's available on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you.